Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give a few minutes for everyone to get in. I'm Jenna Beth Ferguson with the Healthcare Facilities Symposium. Hope everyone is doing well. Our panelists are ready to talk to you this afternoon. Folks are still filing in, so we're just going to give it another minute or so. All right. So again, I am Jenna Beth Ferguson with the Healthcare Facilities Symposium. Welcome to our HFSC webinar series. Very appropriate for today's topic. This has been a great opportunity for us to provide education while we're back in this new sort of hybrid world. While we are back to in-person events, we've held 2 in-person events, but also continuing to give education throughout the year in this setting. And we're really pleased. Today's webinar is sponsored by HBS. They've been a great partner with us. We've done a webinar before with them and bringing education in this format. We're really pleased to do it again this afternoon. And just a couple of housekeeping announcements. For those that when you registered provided an AIA number, we will be submitting your credits to the AIA within 2 weeks of the conclusion of this webinar. It'll most likely happen next week. For anyone looking for a certificate of completion to self-report or just to have on file, once the webinar has completed within 24 hours, you can log back into where you viewed the webinar and you will be able to download your own certificate of completion. If you have any questions about any of that, you can send them to the chat. You can also send them to my email, which is on the HFSC website. And then also we will be offering a recording of this webinar that'll be available on the HFSC YouTube channel. So that's all for now. Let's get into the presentation. It's with great pleasure for me to introduce Melanie with HBS, and she will kick things off today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me kind of go through the learning objectives are there for your review. I'm not going to go over these, but they're there available. I want to jump to our panelists here. So good afternoon, and thank you very much, Healthcare Facilities, for your support in all of this. My name is Melanie Beekes. I am the VP of Strategic Development with HBS, an affiliate. We provide equipment planning, transition, activation, regulatory, move planning services for the industry. Collectively, excitingly, this year, we will be celebrating over 20 years in the business. So I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be sponsoring this webinar event. Today, you're going to hear from each of the panelists here how they overcame their challenges to reach kind of this new virtual hybrid world normal. You'll also hear from our project manager, share her perspective on how we adapted to those conditions in order to meet the expected level of service that's required in our industry. So let's do a quick round of introductions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hajar Ahmed, and I'm a project manager here with HTS.
Hi, I'm Allison Cole, Associate Executive Director at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia.
Good afternoon. I'm Eileen Hayes, the Director of Transition, Activation, and Operational Readiness at the Metro Health System in Cleveland, Ohio.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Alex Tuchera. I'm the Nurse Construction Liaison here at Children's Hospital Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska.
Thanks, everybody. So again, just to kind of lighten it up here, I thought I'd start with a few statistics. As everybody knows, the pandemic has had a profound impact on how people work, especially in healthcare, which has been predominantly, a lot of on-site work for, of course, our healthcare professionals, but even those office administrative areas has had a kind of a big impact. Virtual meetings, of course, have taken, we've taken it to the next level in these last 2 years. And I personally don't foresee us going back to simple, voice phone meetings now that we have all of these different platforms. So anyways, just a few stats, 30% of course of our organizations now are really leaning or doing conferencing well, they were doing conferencing, excuse me, before COVID, only 30%. That, of course, has changed dramatically to probably about 75%. About 25% of the Americans in the United States were really working remotely in 2021. And according to stats and the Gallup poll, that about 36 million Americans are going to be working from home. So again, from our industry, this is really changing the way we deliver work, how we engage with different people across the United States. 25%, of course, are going to permanently be moving to home. And that definitely has a profound effect on, again, like I mentioned, the administrative roles in a hospital. And then according to the Globe News Hire, we have about 47% of video callers now claim that this type of conferencing platforms have reduced their travel cost, which I can say it definitely has reduced our travel cost to the point that now clients are expecting that our travel costs are less because of these tools that we now have in place. So how did we navigate through this kind of virtual environment? I bet everyone on the call can relate to any, if not all of these things that have happened. You get on a call, somebody arrives late, they disrupt the meeting. You've got distractions in the background. I put my dog outside for this purpose today because I didn't want him to interrupt the conversation. We have people in the background with just different distractions. So again, everyone has navigated these disrupted things and very, very well, I might say. Now we're getting very fancy. We're putting our backgrounds and we're making everything a little bit more personal. So again, you're going to hear from today our presentation give our panelists will give some pointers with you how to successfully kind of manage these waters ahead of us.
So hi, everyone. Hajar here to kind of talk a little bit about the perspective of the consultant kind of through this transition since 2020. So when I actually started with HTS in March of 2020, I was coming into a situation where really working with our legacy staff and our typical processes, and in a position now where we really needed to think about how we pivot, right? And so we put this graph together to kind of help to visualize. The blue bars here represent the number of COVID cases in the US per 100,000 people. And then the orange graph here really lays out the percentage of virtual processes that were used kind of throughout time and as those numbers continue to increase or decrease. So in the beginning, we have, kicking off March of 2020, pre-March 2020, we have our typical process, right? We have our group here. They even have their hands on their shoulders. So this is pre-COVID, right? Regular travel, in-person meetings, large gatherings. And then very quickly, as we move up, we found ourselves in total isolation. So when we're in kind of July timeframe, and this is not just isolation from our clients, as you all kind of live through, it's isolation from friends and family. And so this is a single person sitting at their desk. This was the largest shift in our work, right? Everything went to 100% virtual. There was no travel at all whatsoever. And I kind of felt like at that time, even though we were adjusting virtually, we kind of treated it almost as a Band-Aid, right? We thought it was temporary. We just need to adjust for the time being, and then we can go back to how we did things normally. What we grew to learn, and as the graph kind of progressed, the COVID numbers increases and decreases, and we found ourselves almost in a state of uncertainty throughout. You would be planning to go on site once COVID cases were down, and then you would find out, maybe the day before or a week before that actually cases are spiking and you can't come on site anymore. And so we were constantly preparing for, let's have everything ready to be on site. And then let's have everything ready for if we have to go virtual. But again, operating in this kind of uncertainty in this middle point of where we're going to be. And then in this picture here really represents when we were able to be on site, we were on site with limitations. There were smaller groups. maybe we're only limited to 10 people at a time in a room to facilitate events that traditionally hosted 30 people. And so that came with its own challenges. And one of the things that we noticed when we were on site, even if we did have a smaller group, we'd get on site, we'd meet with the core team, and then the majority of the participants would still be virtual. And I'm sure we've all had that moment where you go to a meeting and there's maybe 2 or 3 people in the room and there's 30 people on the call. And I think that's when the aha moment clicked of, cases are down and we're traveling, but we're not really going back to how things used to be. And there needs to be some sort of adaptation to what's today our new normal, which is this kind of hybrid model with you have, the participants that are in person with a complement of people that are joining you virtually. This has really allowed us, like Melanie mentioned earlier, there was a significant reduction in travel costs. We really looked at our processes very closely, and in this kind of process allowed us to be a little critical of, where we can kind of implement some of these efficiencies. So some of our processes, for example, our committee meetings have gone more or less 100% virtual. We realized that we could have, a wider outreach to people and accommodate and get our work done if we focus on doing that virtually and then really being strategic about when we're on site. We also had to adjust our staffing, right? So if I'm in a room facilitating an event and I'm fielding questions from people that are in person, I need someone else to help me manage that virtual component, monitor the chat, make sure that the documents that are being shared in person are also being shared virtually so that you can continue to get that engagement. So there were a lot of lessons learned along the way to get us to our new normal, but at some point there was a shift where there was a mindset shift into adjusting and adapting and really wanting to implement those efficiencies. So in the next slide, we kind of spelled out some of these, and I talked about a few of these already, kind of pre-pandemic and where we are today. So fostering relationships, this was something that I definitely took for granted when you're on site, and those hallway conversations and those sidebar conversations that we know is a lot of times where a lot of the work gets done. That more or less disappeared. And so, a Zoom call ends and it's just over. There's no kind of lingering conversation. And so you had to be very intentional about team building. And so we had to think through when we were on site, we had to be very intentional about setting up activities or team dinners or lunches with the intention of really making sure that we're setting aside time to get to know the team, which really impacts the way that we do our work. The second point here, on-site meetings, this is pretty straightforward. You have your typical, agenda, sign-in sheet meetings, and you have someone facilitating. Well, in the past, when you would have someone miss a meeting, you would be able to get them notes, or maybe they get a download from someone, but they really miss the conversation and the Q&A portion of the meeting that really helps to message the conversation that was happening. And now where we are today, we're all in a habit of recording meetings or training sessions. So in my project specifically, whenever we had like a kickoff presentation, town hall events, or something that we thought was really important to record, we would record those sessions, and that became the basis of future orientation, training, and onboarding materials for new staff. So turnover happens, and kind of comparing the process of getting someone onboarded to the project pre-COVID versus you're able to give them 3 or 4 videos to say, here's when we kicked off, here's the scope, here are the decisions, major decisions made to date. And in a 4-hour span, they're pretty much up to speed on the last, year and a half worth of work. And then the last point here, in-person whiteboarding. So this is typical of like our workflow processes, gatherings of up to 30 people or more collaborating in a room. And what we realized by having a virtual component is that you could be very strategic about who you have on the call. So an example of this is we would have the architects calling to the beginning of our workflow sessions and just do a design overview with the group. So typically this may not have been the best use of resources or time to have them fly in to talk for 10 minutes at the beginning of a session, but now you can really have this component as part of your process that really help to, better facilitate those types of sessions. So there are a lot more examples than the ones mentioned here, but these are just a few of the ones that we kind of identified and then implemented in what's today our, permanent process. And now we'll hear from the front line, so our perspectives from our esteemed panelists. So I will hand it over to Alex.
Thanks, Hajar. Esteemed panelist is something that's going to go on my LinkedIn profile now. That's the first time I've been referred to as that, so thank you. Again, I'm Alex from Omaha, Omaha Children's. Our project here was the Hubbard Center for Children. It was approximately 400,000+ square feet standalone building, or building that was adjacent to our clinic building and our existing hospital. We're doing another subsequent 2-year renovation that we're in the middle of right now. We added 130 mostly critical care beds to our hospital for this, but I got involved in this project right at the point that transition planning started. That was in about October of 2019. We were able to get our transition planning partners, both HTS and CBRE, on site late in 2019, and then had our subsequent standing meetings at the beginning of 2020. The infamous time of March of 2020 really happened when HTS and CBRE were actually already on site with us. So we then kind of had to shut everything down as far as, Children's put some restrictions on who could be in-house, very strict restrictions. And so we went to a pretty much virtual transition planning meetings from that point on for the subsequent 3, 4, 5 months. And then sort of slowly kind of brought them back on site as we could. Obviously, with construction ongoing, we didn't really slip as much as we really thought we would with COVID. We had an initial go live of the middle of summer of 2021, and that slipped to the end of summer. And that was mostly because we added another floor to the project. So we kind of kept things moving with the project. And obviously, we have had a lot of hurdles and a lot of fun times. And we'll talk about that subsequently in a couple more slides. But I will let Allison discuss her project.
Thank you very much, Alex. So what a difference a year makes. We just celebrated our 1-year milestone a few weeks ago here in Philadelphia at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. You're seeing a photo of the HUP Pavilion, which is a $1.6 billion facility. It's actually the largest capital project in Penn Medicine's history. And in Philadelphia, it's really one of the most sophisticated and ambitious healthcare projects around. It is a 1.5 million square foot facility, so quite a large site. We housed over 504 patient rooms, 47 operating rooms, and a 2-story emergency department. So it sounds like I was on the same timeline as Alex. We were originally planning for a summer of 2021 opening. We halted our construction for 2 months and then reopened just after Memorial Day in 2020. We were able to return to schedule and lost just about 3 months of actual activation to get to that October deadline. At the time of the pandemic, we were just 2 months into the kickoff of our engagement with our transition consultants, HBS and Yellowbrick, and pivoted very quickly into a virtual environment, really using hybrid for things later on in our transition once some of the social distancing started to soften. But I really helped to accelerate our transition, and we again utilizing things like our Teams for activation meetings, and again just on-site meetings for those types of hands-on work. And it's a process that will continue moving forward. So I'll turn that over to Eileen, who's the newest on the block in terms of opening her facility.
Yes, thanks, Allison. Yes, this slide is hot off the press. We opened our facility 11 days ago. It's called the Glick Center at Metro Health in Cleveland, Ohio, 725,000 square feet. Replacement hospital. Metro Health has a 185-year history, multiple buildings that we housed our patient care services and clinical services in. So this all came together for us. The transition planning and assessment started off in March with HTS. I came on board in late June of 2021. I met the HTS team once before we had to shut down the entire project and go virtual. All of the planning meetings, all of our committee meetings were held virtually. And then when we did get to on-site meetings, again, we were following the COVID guidelines of the county and the state. Also, Metro Health was one of the first hospitals to mandate vaccination for all not only employees, but all vendors and contractors. So that impacted our workplace. We are set up all in one room where we have the contractor, architect, project team, and then the consultants come in. So that really impacted and forced more people out into the virtual world, especially our architects were from out of town. So it became very interesting. We'd bring people on board, and then the next week we'd have to do virtual meetings again. So we did many meetings over the last year, all virtual, and there were lots of benefits to that as well, with engaging the folks, our physicians, who typically don't have the time to run from meeting to meeting, but they can be in their office or their clinic and jump on a meeting and be able to participate. So very challenging time, but obviously we opened well. The timeline, we were very fortunate. We really did not have supply chain issues during the build of our project. And we had targeted the fall. We did slide just 3 weeks due to some facility issues that we were working out with some of our air balancing, but we were able to maintain the original timeline that was set back in 2018, 2019.
So now that we've kind of laid out the environment, the climate that each of our panelists were experiencing in their perspective timelines, I thought I'd shift a little bit here so they can talk to you guys about some of their virtual challenges that they encountered. And I'm sure everyone, again, can relate to a lot of these things. In the virtual environment, it does require us to have, a different kind of level of structure and organization. We have to make sure that we don't have distractions in our environments. Of course, all these side discussions and technical difficulties are things that, again, you'll hear each one of them kind of describe. So I will turn it over now to our speakers who will share their experiences.
Yeah, so I think between the three of us, there's a lot of commonalities in terms of obstacles we faced and the tools that we used. I think Eileen and Allison are both much more distinguished and elegant speakers than I am, so I'll kind of keep it at a high level here and touch on just a couple of things. What you see here is actually a photo of our command center on our patient move day. That was August 29th of 2021. I see a couple of attendees that were actually in that room with me. So, one reason I put that photo up, that was the most people we had in a room in over 1.5 years at that point. So the end of 2021, we had about 40 to 50 people in that room at any given time. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is the most people we've had at one place since, the beginning of 2020. So you see that, for us, bringing a physical space to life kind of in this virtual environment, we kind of had to navigate those waters and kind of roll with the punches because we didn't really know how to do that at the time. I think most of our consultants were used to being on site, used to seeing the end users face to face and kind of working through whether it's workflows, paths of travel, anything like that. We had to try to figure out how to do that over a WebEx or a Zoom. So, we'll talk about tools that I use. Whether that's me bleeding my phone with FaceTime and getting in the space itself. There was also restrictions on who could be in the building. So it was only construction staff like myself. So even our end users couldn't see it. So it was trying to bring the end users, the consultants, everybody in a space together while still, sitting at our desks, which I feel like was a huge challenge, especially initially in the project before we kind of got in our groove. And then I just want to skip to as well the last point there, being the face of the transition planning for our hospital, and also being the face for the consultants for our hospital. I'm kind of that linch point. I was the host for dozens of meetings a week, it felt like. So as we're doing these virtual meetings, everybody's got an agenda, and the meeting's got an agenda as well. So you want to kind of make sure you keep people on track. Whether you're bringing in different departments, everybody wants to talk about this 15 square foot closet at the end of the hallway that they didn't think should be there, or should be filled with something else, but you kind of got to reel them back in. So just making sure that you or the host can kind of keep everybody on track, making sure that everything is timed out well and you're being respectful of people's time. I felt like that was a big win, giving people time back constantly and making sure that I kept that at the top of my mind when I started. any of our virtual meetings. But I know that Allison and Eileen have some other obstacles as well. So Allison, anything from Penn?
Sure, we had our share of obstacles as well. I think, what was really apparent from the start was how reliant we were on in-person meetings. We typically met near departments or offices, tried to be as close to our areas of operation so that we could have staff kind of fluidly come in and out of the meetings as they were needed on the agenda. If a subject matter expert was missing, we could go get them. Contrast that to flipping into a virtual setting where we needed to make sure they were invited. We started to become, later on very adept at, okay, let me ping and drag someone in, but it required a little more pre-planning, agenda timing set in advance, as well as, to Alex's point, objectives, and really keeping the conversation going and to make sure that we had the right people in the meeting that could contribute to those goals. When we talk about trust, just as Alex said as well, understanding and reading body language, those types of team dynamics and cues that we normally would have had didn't happen at the beginning of our virtual environment. And so how we built relationships needed to change. While we always did introductions, I think looking back, it may have been helpful to really have maybe some type of formal icebreaker or other way to establish that common ground and connection that you just normally would have had being in the room and being in the space together, having consultant teams sort of encamped and sometimes shoulder to shoulder with you. So I think the informal nature of sort of working from home also really impacted us. But there was also a silver lining in that I think what would have been very sometimes a strictly professional relationship, actually we got to start to see and peer into personal lives, and that started to really I think endear us all, and we started to learn each other's pets and those types of things. Just some of the other obstacles, thinking about flipping between platforms, how far we've come, but we were an MS Teams site, or became that. Our consultants typically may have been on Zoom or even something else at the time. Early days, we were limited to the number of people we could invite and licensing. And so we overcame that, thank goodness, quite rapidly. But those are some of the obstacles early on. And then I think just once we became more familiar with operating in a platform, some of our participants realized that they could double book themselves, and so and extend their times by having to join 2 meetings. And so we not only in keeping the agenda on task, but also making sure that in fact someone that was on the phone, maybe not on camera, was actually engaged and involved in the decisions that were being made. And so it's not just who was in agreement, but who was also paying attention. So we'll see if Eileen had some of those same obstacles bringing up her project.
Yes, I could echo what Alex and Allison just said. One of the things I want to expand on a little bit is bringing the physical space to life in the virtual reality. A huge obstacle for our team was that the users basically were not involved in the design. So one of the first transition planning meetings we had, these people were seeing their floor plans, their equipment lists, the furniture lists for the very first time since way back in programming that was done 3 years prior. So that was a very difficult obstacle because our consultants, HTS, really took the brunt of what didn't happen and the involvement that didn't happen prior to us working on transition planning and activation. And so leading into that, as the others have said, the difficulty reading body language. And I know when this virtual platform first came out, most people were very uncomfortable being on camera, myself included. I was on other meetings, I would never turn that camera on. I'm like, oh, I don't like seeing myself. So that was a challenge too, because I think that prohibited people from participating as well. So that was a real struggle. People dropping off the calls before the end of the meeting. I mean, these transition activation meetings are multidisciplinary group. One of the things I'm famous for saying is, it takes a village to make this all happen. And we would give status reports. And so one of my managers would give their update and then they would drop off the call. And so now they were no longer participating in the rest of the conversation and concerns from the other participants participants in the meeting. So that was very challenging because now you had to go and follow up with people to get the answers to those questions too. Stopping and starting conversations. Again, those are those people that, you know, have half a sentence done and they're on mute. So then everybody stops and you're on mute. And then the conversation has to start again. So it's really became really inefficient. But I think it's because, you know, we really didn't have set criteria, guidelines for what's the etiquette during the virtual meetings. You know, we just had to jump in and get the work done. So, you know, it's been very interesting. I think the other obstacle was in the virtual reality, you invite people forward these meetings to their friends and family, basically, right? And there's always that one person that you purposely did not invite that ends up on the call because everybody thinks everybody else needs to be involved. I am all for inclusivity, the more the merrier, but sometimes that makes for unproductive meetings as well. So I'll turn it back to you, Melanie.
And thank you very much, Eileen. And so now I'd like to kind of shift, now that we've kind of heard everybody's struggles, and I'm sure we can all relate to these obstacles that were that impacted our meetings and the management of our meetings. Let's talk a little bit about kind of how we migrated those challenges and came up with some tools or solutions to that. So again, one of the things that has come up in several of our client interactions is the use of the tablet or the use of the iPad to help bring more people into sessions, as well as, again, having a kind of this Hollywood Squares look to bring everyone into the session and virtually see everyone engaging and being active in perhaps a workflow session or a day in the life simulation activity. So again, we have, from a consultant's perspective, really are pushing the envelope with the tools of a lot of these, you know, web-based communication platforms, as well as collaborative platforms like Smartsheets and Miro to help, again, bring that input and work collaboratively with each other and with our clients. So again, we'll do what it takes. Again, these iPads were extremely useful. At that time, we only had the ability to bring in maybe 2 or 3 people into our workflow or day in life sessions. By bringing in and having the iPad here, we were able to bring in a lot more folks into the sessions.
Thanks, Melanie. A few things here at Children's that we did I don't think it can be beaten to the ground enough. I mean, using iPads or iPhones to get in and use FaceTime and walk paths of travel and, you know, do workflows via that dynamic was very helpful and something that we did throughout the project. So I know the other panelists are going to touch on that as well. But something that I kind of tried to use was trying to make the meetings a little bit different every time we would have them. So try to get out of the monotony of these cadence meetings. I know they can kind of go one to the next. So with the help of marketing, I would continually update our hospital intranet. I would then use those subsequent photos and videos of our space to kind of try to add something to the meeting. Those would spark conversation. They would get people excited about at least what we were doing as far as transition planning, get to show them the space that they're going to eventually move into. So just a little piece that I like to try to use, especially with our regular cadence meetings that could get rather monotonous. Here at Children's, as Eileen had said, we actually adopted a cameras on policy, as I know a lot of other organizations did. Really felt that helped garner some, you know, a little more of that face-to-face that you were missing when people were afraid to turn their cameras on. It still made it feel a little bit more like a meeting rather than just flipping through a slideshow as well. And then something I've adopted here moving forward, and now that we're kind of in what we've referred to as the new normal, is more of a blended meeting model. I know there was a lot of smaller groups, whether it was workflows or kind of the hands-on, or even some of those folks who, for lack of a better term, were old school and would still like to meet in person. If we could meet safely, if we could have a group of 4 to 6 people, I would try to do that every maybe 3rd or 4th meeting if I could with them, just to kind of allow for a different feel to the meetings. Whereas, we could still get online and still do a Zoom meeting, but if we could kind of do a blended model where we would still do some in-person meetings. But really, I think the biggest takeaway that we'll talk about eventually is just once we really got in a groove after, the shock and awe wore off of, March, April, May of 2020, you really got in a groove, and we could power through our transition planning meetings, our regular cadence meetings. I could get what felt like so much more done in my day just by sitting here rather than walking across campus, which could take 15, 20 minutes. Eileen, I saw your campus. That could take a couple hours over there. So, rather than utilizing our time wisely that way, so I just felt like eventually we got to a point where it was the right thing to do. And rather than bring our transition planners on site every month, we could do it every other month or every third month, just to make sure that we were still meeting their needs and our end users' needs while still being conscious about budget and time. So, Allison, how about at Penn?
Yeah, I think, you talk about saving time on distance. And for me, it's trying to find things that we're saving. So, a big pivot for us and benefit was really document archiving and being able to share tasks. So, as I said, we used MS Teams. We utilized liberally the channels to archive presentations. We included meeting minutes. We became very fluid with smart sheets, and we were able to really replace kind of vintage use of shared drives, SharePoints, outdated Excels, needing for things like Microsoft project licenses. So all of these tools actually really enhanced our integration in ways that I don't think we would have even thought of prior to the pandemic. We were also able to create more focused meeting participants when we didn't have folks, like Eileen said, that joined unwanted, but we were able to have great conversations, share information with audiences that we wouldn't otherwise have that access to. And the image that's there is actually one of a tabletop dress rehearsal, walking through plans with teams that were both on site as well as off site. And if you've ever gathered around a blueprint, you know how hard it is just to see it at a table. This really allowed us to Zoom, do those kinds of things that helped us to better explain the project as we were moving through and into activation. We also took advantage of this with teams that on the owner side that we might not have had access to, such as our trades, and other vendors during our building load in and activation. HBS was able to really bring together all of our internal resources, our consultants, our contractors. This would have been impossible to do while folks were in the field, and we were able to really resolve things like that, like daily, in the moment, and really seamlessly from anywhere. Sort of kind of thinking about internally. We took advantage of technology and the ability and these platforms really to broadcast messaging, town hall style broadcasts that we had never done before. It allowed us to kind of keep the enthusiasm up. Was a wanted just sort of distraction to sort of the daily grind of what our teams were dealing with in COVID and out on the units. And so providing sort of that lift of live Q&A, virtual tours, it allowed for that archiving of communication messages as we continued on, and then just use of things like YouTube for education, instructions, any type of orientation to the various tasks related to training and activation. We could have a training session about what we needed, record that. Our consultants could do that, and then anyone that couldn't be at that meeting could go back and use this as a reference around what was needed for some of our train the trainer modules. And then it really paid off as we got into kind of the spikes around COVID, just needing to limit teams, but needing to also have immediate access with our surveyor that the iPads provided sort of immediate point of view as we got into those sort of final days of occupancy. So Eileen, interested in sort of hearing how you benefited as well.
So in addition to what Alex and Allison pointed out, we did the same sort of things. We did use virtual platform Miro, which engaged many more of our providers, our caregivers, again, even our contractors and consultants that we needed. So we had the ability virtually to do the brainstorming, to come up with the different ideas, to walk the paths of travel, to do the workflows for each one of the different activities. As you can see on my right, we engaged one of our consultants to develop a virtual reality video of the actual building. We were very limited, particularly in the beginning, of people that could enter the building. I was giving, oh my God, so many tours day after day after day. But this allowed the masses, more than 5,000 people, to go in and more gain an awareness of the facility, the layout of the facility, prior to substantial completion. If you weren't a gamer, this was a little challenging for folks, but it was great when I did do those tours, and those people that did take the virtual reality, they would say, oh, that's where I ran into the wall, or oh, I see where the cafeteria is. So this was a very powerful tool for all of our staff. We did make it mandatory as part of our training and orientation, just as important as the life safety training that we made mandatory before people could come into the building. So these were great tools to engage everybody. Even, you know, the outside consultants could take a look at that as well. And you could see the building come together actually before it was all together. So that was a fabulous tool for us to use.
Wonderful. So now you've kind of heard from each of the esteemed panelists speak to all of their obstacles, their challenges, and how they kind of overcome them. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to find different ways of communicating with each other in a collaborative way. So that's kind of the positive of all this. There's lots of new things, again, coming on the horizon on ways to collaborate better. I always think we can push the envelope there. I'm going to provide this checklist in the presentation, of course. It's just something that we use to help us kind of navigate through these waters. We're planners at heart. So again, we want to try to make sure all of our sessions and all of our interactions with our clients are very efficient and productive. And so we try to make sure we have some kind of framework, again, in place. So again, this checklist is there for you. I'd like to now turn it to our panelists who will kind of round us out here and speak to their respective key takeaways.
Sure, Melanie, I think you just touched on it, but I think my first and most important one is just making, why did it take a pandemic to realize how inefficient we were being in our previous meetings? I look back at our very first transition planning meetings and those first few months and running in between conference rooms and thinking about the overall, structure of the meetings and how maybe chaotic they were. And then looking at, once we got into virtual meetings or that virtual meeting cadence, how productive they were, how much we could get done, what a better cost savings it was for us, and what a better time savings it was. So obviously, I think that's the kind of the grand takeaway of almost this entire presentation. But also just a couple other tiny things that, being comfortable as being the host of a virtual meeting and being able to drive the meeting in the correct way, making sure that there's an agenda, it's followed, and that people are heard, but also they don't commandeer, the meeting itself. And then finally, kind of moving, as Hajar pointed out at the very beginning, kind of there's that blended hybrid model of, is that all virtual meetings? Is that some in-person meetings? Is that where you have an in-person meeting and there's a couple people that are still virtual? So just being comfortable with that, knowing your audience and knowing what they're comfortable with. So Allison, how about yours?
Thanks, all great points. I think Alex had showed a picture of his virtual command center, sort of representing the first time that folks were in person and offsite in some numbers. We were actually, this is something that at Penn Medicine, I don't think we'll ever really pivot back to the old way. We used virtual command centers throughout our patient move, throughout the entire building activation, and then post activation in the 2 weeks following, really having a command center 24/7. It allowed a core group to remain on site and accessible to our teams, but then to have all of our subject matter experts, being able to sleep, being able to sort of be that person that you could reach at 1 in the morning if needed, but not necessarily, right in the room that they could dial in and be immediately accessible. So as well as connecting both move as well as activation command centers beyond just what would have typically been a conference call line. And so that was fantastic, and walkie-talkie. So we'll definitely consider continue that. As I mentioned before, Smartsheet and using that, I think this was one of those pieces I was looking for as we began the project of just how do you keep updated on all of the punch list works to complete and have so many people dynamically updating and task tracking. I'm sure there's other cloud-based tools out there, but having those accessible really allowed for us to not only track accountability, but push out tasks to individuals to complete in a really organized way. And then I guess just finally, just that unlimited access to subject matter experts for input. Really, it pushed the boundaries of who we could access, how someone could be pulled in, even if it was some, a surgeon in the operating room. Sure, I'll jump out and someone will be able to, participate. We had those types of moments, or an engineer in the field. So again, things that we'll continue to incorporate now that we have access to these types of key tools. And I'm sure Eileen has some additional to add.
Yes, I think for Metro Health, some of the key takeaways, and it's interesting just having finished the first part of our project, everything is fresh in my mind of how we could have done it better. How can we improve? So I think, as we say, like encouraging people to utilize the chat so that their questions can get answered. Again, you do need that second person to be tracking that while you're presenting. But I found that to be very helpful. What I was able to do with our team, our middle management folks were the critical folks for me to engage with, to provide information. We were not able to have town hall meetings, because of the COVID and all of that. So the platforms allowed me to provide them information, and then also allowed us to listen. What are your concerns before we get into the building? What workflows? What do you need to know? So as we went through over the summer into the fall, we saw more and more engagement in all of those meetings. Again, leveraging the tools that we all pointed out in our presentation here today, where you can bring a lot of things to life so much more efficiently than exactly sitting around a floor plan that only a couple people can really see from where their standpoint is. So, and again, what we didn't do, which I think, we need to do moving forward, is build those guidelines around virtual meetings. What is that etiquette that your organization would like to put in place? Alex had mentioned the camera on policy. Things like, okay, only the people that are invited should attend the meeting, things like that. So much more to learn from the new normal. So I think that's all I have on the key takeaways here.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Alex, Allison, and Eileen and Hajar for sharing their experiences and opening up to talk about the obstacles that they had and how they overcame them. We have a few questions here in the chat that I kind of want to jump to pretty quickly. And one of them was about what is the percentage of what percentage of current meetings do you hold now virtually in your organization? Is it 10% or 100%?
I think I can speak to that, at least from my personal perspective. I think I'm about 50-50 just because I still have the construction team right outside my door, and we still have mostly standing in-person meetings. But as an organization, I would guess that we're probably more in the 75 to 85% range.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think I'm more of the 70 to 75% that's virtual.
At Penn Medicine, we're still pretty high. I think it's closer to about 90, 95 of our meetings still virtual, mostly because our conference rooms are not wired for hybrid in all instances. So we're relying mostly on our desktops to facilitate that. So while we're all sitting in our offices.
Actually, that's a really good point. I think now, again, in our
Mhm.
industry and future construction, we're probably going to need to think more about more pressure on the IT group, right? Like they didn't have enough already. But now that is going to be a definite demand to just function, honestly, in the new world, for sure. Another question here we had about kind of just managing this new culture in our organization in the virtual environment, because we have such a, of course, this industry has such a just a wide range of different types of people and learners and people that have experience and people that don't have experience. So how do each of you maintain or manage your organizational culture in this environment?
Mhm.
I'd say we started off by incorporating stories. So storytelling is a really great tool in any culture, in-person meeting or virtual, for just communicating what's important. And so trying to keep things patient-centered, sharing some joy at the beginning of a meeting, kind of grounding that, bringing that wellness moment. Those are things that are important to us. We've tried to incorporate that rather than sort of just diving into business, and kind of keeping those that light, allowing for two-way communication, which has been fantastic through, the ability to raise your hand and participate in ways that in a large room or a large gathering, you might not have been able to. So those are some things we've been doing.
At Children's, we've always started our, either clinical meetings or whether it's construction meetings, we like to start with a safety moment. And, that was a lot easier in person, that somebody would be assigned, quote unquote, for every standing meeting to have a safety moment. And we're still adapting that to our virtual meetings as well.
Yeah, I think, at Metro, I had mentioned that, people were not involved in the design. So one of the main goals that I had as a leader on the project was to engage them and build that trust with people, allowing them time to share their opinions, their perspectives, their concerns with our project team. We had a whole change management process that is continuing. We have lots of change in our organization. We'll have a new CEO starting in another month. So that culture is going to change, but really focusing on, our people as our asset, and that's what influences the level of care and services that we provide.
And I'll share an example from one of my clients that I really love this example of starting each of our meetings with a reflection and a quote, and it would rotate throughout each of the members of the committee. So it wasn't just one person that would do it. Every month it would be a different person. And you would start the meeting with this quote, which was tied to the work that we were doing. And every month, I'm always just kind of floored by how grounding it is to really start a meeting that way and be reminded of why we're here and the work that we're doing and the importance of that work. And then going into the meeting with that mindset. So that's the first that I've seen that. And I've really enjoyed being a part of those meetings and participating in these reflections. And I think it makes a huge difference in how the rest of the meeting is run and that engagement that you get from the group.
Mhm.
That's excellent. Now, being transparent and doing these exercises that you guys have just described is, I think, what makes our virtual, highly technology world more human. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get to is, again, just use this tool and this platform to communicate, but also bring in that human element to our meetings and just the work that we do. I'd like to open it up now to the people on the call. If there's anybody that wants to ask a question that wasn't in the chat. And if not, I will end it there and turn it over. Again, thank you very much to the panelists. I appreciate your input, your insight, your time, and have a great rest of your day. And I'll turn it over now to Jenabeth.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you again to HBS for sponsoring today's webinar, to Melanie and Hajar for helping to bring this content to us. And then thank you so much to what are now known as the esteemed panelists, Allison, Eileen, and Alex, for taking the time out of your, incredibly busy schedules and sharing the stories from your projects and organizations. I myself learned an awful lot this afternoon, and I loved that, Hajar, I loved that example of the quote. That is, I may be stealing that. That's a really cool one. So just a few reminders about housekeepings. I mentioned at the beginning, anyone who is looking for their AIA credit for today's webinar will be submitting, excuse me, on your behalf to the AIA within the 2-week time frame, but most likely by next week. Anyone who needs a certificate of completion for self-reporting to other organizations, you may log back into where you viewed this webinar within 24 hours after the webinar, and you will be able to download a certificate of that time. If you have any questions, again, I'm Jenna Beth Ferguson with the Healthcare Facilities Symposium. My email's on the website. Please feel free to reach out. And thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Please be on the lookout for more webinars as we move forward. And then obviously we are excited to be back for in-person events, and next year's Healthcare Facilities Symposium is going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina in September. Look forward to seeing everyone there. Thank you again to our panelists. Thanks to everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.